Y'all have a seat.
Take a pose. Take a pose.
Sit.
and
I like that eating the other day.
Okay. Well, we don't have much about Berea, but here's what we know is that he fled from Thessalonica and made his way to Berea, and there he found a synagogue, and that's where he talked to the Jews. And so now the Berean Jews were of more noble character than those in Thessalonica, for they received the message with great eagerness and examined the scriptures every day to see what Paul said was true. And as a result, many of them believed, as did also a number of prominent Greek women and many Greek men. You see one of the themes about these prominent Greek women believing. But the thing that I want to focus on is the Berean Jews. It says they were of more noble character. I remember years ago where I had I had one of those difficult Christians. You ever met one of those difficult Christians? Like whenever you preach. What's that?
You mean on this?
I said on this trip.
listen, y'all been relative. I mean, not even relative. Y'all been great. Like, so I have to try to be on my best behavior too. You've been one of those? But I had years ago, this guy's like, I'm just a Berean Christian. And when you study, basically what he's saying is like, I'm just gonna make sure that everything you say is true. And then I remember this one time, this guy who was his, by his own admission, a Berean Christian, I preached a message where I had said where you can tell the devil to go to hell because that's where he belongs. He's like, well, you can't talk to the devil. So I started showing him all these places where, yeah, you can. But anyways, the thought when you read this that these Berean Jews were of more noble character because they are lost, but yet they have the scriptures and they want to make sure that what Paul is saying about Jesus is true. And so while I'm all for someone being a Berean Christian, because yes, I want you to make sure that what is in the scriptures and even what I would preach or what anybody else would say would be true, we have to understand that this particular context, they didn't know Jesus. And so Paul is coming and he's saying that the Old Testament is pointing to Jesus. So what are they doing? They're going to the scriptures and going, okay, do the Old Testament scriptures point to Jesus? And so that's kind of where, if you want to be a Berean Christian, make sure that everything's pointing to Jesus, because that's ultimately what it is. But what I would also say, if you wanted to apply it in the 21st century in terms of being a Berean, Jew or being a Berean American, is that, you're going to your own, kind of, context of going, is that true? Like, is it true being, again, just fill in the blank. And so, I'm using Orchin because we can all, use Orchin as, he ought to go back to the Quran and go, is this true? Is this true? Now, obviously, the Jews, they had the scriptures. There was prophecy saying about a Messiah, and so that's the reason why they are the ones that many are converting, because they're like, but I also want to make sure that we also realize that throughout is that they're not coming to this on their own. God is giving them an open heart with open eyes to see that Jesus is. But why do you think that was, though? Because they searched. They wanted to know. There are a lot of people, they're closed off, rooted in whatever their faith is, whatever their tradition is, and they're so closed off. But because they were of more noble character, they wanted to know. And this is part of where I really do believe that if people have this open heart, it's what I would call, there are some people ready to be found. So like Lydia was someone who was ready to be found. The Berean Jews, they were ready to be found. They had the scriptures, they had this open heart, they wanted to know the truth. There are some people like the slave girl. They need to be freed to be found. So there's something that needs to happen in their life. They need to have some kind of freedom in order to be found. And then there are some people like the Philippian jailer. They need to be calmed to be found. They're in a state of crisis where he was ready to kill himself. But Paul calmed him down, And then that's when he said, well, sirs, what must I do to be saved? So there are some people ready to be found. There are some people that need to be free to be found. And there are some people that need to be calm to be found. Well, the Bereans would be, they're ready to be found. They're just looking at the scripture going, oh, you're right. And then that's where the conversion happens. And so as a result, many of them believe. But then when the Jews in Thessalonica, who they're just closed off, they're hard-hearted, learned that Paul was preaching the word of God at Berea, some of them went there too, agitating the crowd, stirring them up, and the believers immediately sent Paul to the coast. And so it's going to be from the coast, he gets on a boat and he goes to Athens. And so that's where, when we get to Athens, just know that it wasn't necessarily a planned stop. You know, like, Paul didn't necessarily plan to go to Athens. He's trying to escape these Jews from Thessalonica that's coming to Berea because they want to put a stop to Paul. So, but you feel free to be a Berean Christian, but just know that when you apply it, they were Berean Jews. They're just making sure that Jesus is found in the Old Testament. And so if you really want to be a Berean Christian, just make sure that every teaching is centered around Jesus.
Amen.
That's the key. You know, so it's centered around Jesus. Any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, you've got a spot there.
Yeah.
You go from they search the scriptures and then the Thessalonican Jews showed up and the believers. So somewhere between his preaching and teaching up here, you know, I've been watching that as you've been talking. They haven't moved.
That's good.
But then the next reference to them is the believers. It's just so that happened somewhere that they must have believed what he told them because they served.
Yeah, oh, it
They
does
were
say.
open.
Yeah. As a result, many of them believe. And it says every day, examine the scriptures every day to see if what Paul said was true. So he's here for at least, several days, maybe a week.
You might have had a week head start.
He might have had a week head start. So he's not here long. Wasn't in Thessalonica
Statue.
long. Wasn't here
Apostle
long.
Paul there.
So so he's moved now. He'll spend a year and a half in Corinth, and Corinth will be kind of his last stop before he begins his journey back to Jerusalem. So what's interesting is after Corinth, again, he spends a year and a half in Corinth, and he's going to go back, but he's going to stop quickly in Ephesus. And he's going to tell them, I promise that I will come back. But it's on his third missionary journey that he spends 2 years and 3 months in Ephesus. So, but it's after he makes his way back through the churches of Galatia, Asia, and then he gets to Ephesus. He spends 2 years, 3 months.
So somebody didn't believe, went to tell the people back to Thessalonica, and it took them however long to get to here, and that's about the head start.
Yeah.
And we just did that.
Yeah,
On the
and it
bus,
was very
it's about a
quick.
45-minute ride.
Very quick.
Tire tracks is close.
Yeah. Well, hey, one of the things, since we're here and it's a little loud, but it's okay. But one of the things I'm going to introduce on the extra takes that I thought might kind of help you also, if whoever wants to participate in extra takes, because I think maybe it'd be pretty cool if I interview you in front of Paul. That's a pretty cool statue of Paul there.
Yeah.
Not a good, because in Corinthians, in the letter to Corinthians, people would say that he wasn't much to look at. He was. Some people think he had an eye issue, which is part of, when he talks about his thorn in the flesh. Some people think that that's what he was talking about. But so a couple thoughts that I had, on this journey. One, it's dangerous. So he's walking or riding an animal on a ship, multiple ships. Like, how dangerous it is for him to take this journey. The second thing is the cost, personal cost, financial cost, physical cost, because there's going to be cities in which he's stoned and left for dead. There's going to be times where he's going to have to hurry up and leave, so, is he able to pack, provisions? So there's just constant cost that is associated with this journey. You have the length of the journey, miles, and how when you look at our plane, our boats, and our automobiles that we've taken. I mean, it's still been long. I mean, just think about how tired we are from all of this traveling, and we have these, in some sense, plush accommodations. Just think about what kind of spiritual connection he has to have with the Spirit to maintain a positive outlook, a positive perspective. Also, there has never been anything quite like it, because you have to understand again how faiths operated back then is that they were geographical, they were regional, they were not global. But this is really the first time in the history of the world where someone is intentionally going from city to city in order to tell them about this good news. Like, it has never happened in the history of civilization. And then another thought was the gospel leaves a mark everywhere it goes. The gospel leaves its mark everywhere it goes. Now, it can leave a mark of dissension. It can leave a mark of division. It can actually leave a mark of destruction, where the gospel has destroyed actual, businesses. But it will always leave also a mark of transformation. Always leave a mark of transformation. And then the last thought I had was this. Think about it. One man's transformation and passion can change an empire. Like dwell on that one. They just one man. I wish I was feeling a little bit better in Tarshish, and now that I get a good feel, I really wish I would have. Y'all want to go back to Tarshish? And no, but just think about. Could you imagine, like, you're growing up as the Apostle Paul in Tarshish? Could you have ever imagined that you would be the one that God tasked to, in some sense, change an empire? Then again, he's the one. He was the catalyst. He was the catalyst. He was the spark. But growing up in this city of Tarshish, because it wasn't Jerusalem. Now, was he educated in Jerusalem by Gamaliel? Yeah, I mean, yes. But he grew up in Tarshish. But to know how God was going to unite Rome and Jerusalem through one man. And from Tarshish, the birthplace of Paul, how he's going to use him to truly spark a gospel revolution that in 3 centuries would revolutionize an empire. And to know, I mean, when you study church history in a 30,000 foot view, that once they have the religious freedom, and in around the 5th century, they are now made the official religion of the Roman Empire. Literally in the Western world, it will completely change the face. And we have been journeying through the footsteps of how he is being the catalyst in all these places, and that it really will create the root system of Western civilization of what we know today. And so that's wild. One man. Yeah.
I would like to say something about he was so intentional. And here in the verse 10, it says, remember, he left Thessaloniki, he was in prison, and he arrived here, and it says in the verse 10, as soon as it was night, the believers sent Paul and Silas away to Berea. On arriving there, he just arrived. On arriving there, they went to Jewish synagogue. So he started to do the same again. As soon as he got here, as soon as he arrived here, he did the same thing. He was in prison there. And now he arrived here and he's intentional doing this. That was his call. Nothing could stop this man to spread the word, to announce the gospel. And it's amazing the way he did it in the chapter 17. We will see that in 7 verses, 7 short verses, he explained the gospel. It's amazing. In Athens, he did that. And we will see it. It's beautiful. In 7 verses.
Well, yeah, when you're talking about in Athens, I mean, one of the things that you have in with Luke is that he'll basically give the summary of Paul's talks. So some people believe that he went on for hours. And particularly in Athens and other places that you just get these short synopses. Another point of reflection though is the diaspora, the scattering of the Jews. So just think about how in God's sovereignty that played in the advancement of the gospel, because wherever there was a synagogue that was in a city, that's where Paul would go, and that kind of was at least a point of connection. And because they had been, settled there for quite some time, they were already in some sense part of the community, even though they're kind of separate, but kind of integrated within the city. So even in God's sovereignty, when something bad happens and something like the diaspora happened, where there's the scattering of the Jews, that actually is to God's advantage. It reminds me of Jeremiah 29, where God tells them that I sent you there, which is actually a missional word. Like, I sent you there with intention. I sent you there with a purpose. I'm going to use your sin for my glory. And so this idea that even in exile and the scattering and the dispersion, God can use that for his mission in the world. So that's another point of reflection, is that as he's going to all of these cities, because Athens, I mean, one of the things about Athens, and there may have been a synagogue there, we don't necessarily know in scriptures. I mean, he goes, and maybe some historian might know, but he's going to go to the Areopagus, and sure, some people are going to believe, but they're not going to have such a community centered around faith as Jews would, because once a Jew believes, what they're, in some sense, churches actually take the form of the synagogue, that they're going to gather together on Sunday, not Sabbath. They're going to gather together, they're going to read the scriptures, they're going to hear a sermon, they're going to pray, they're going to do community. And so really the church, the ecclesia, is going to take the form of the Jewish synagogue, which is why once that they have this religious freedom, you see that they're going to create basilicas. They're going to create these places of community where the ecclesia can gather. So, but it's actually it's actually rooted in the synagogue, So there's a lot of points of connection.
Is Berea the last synagogue mentioned in Acts? In terms of this journey.
Well, Corinth. Because here's the thing: there may have been a synagogue in Corinth. So Paul left the synagogue in Corinth because Aquila and Priscilla were Jews.
That was it.
They were Jews, and it's interesting. Some people actually believe that they had. Some people believe that they were actually there in Acts 2, and when they went back, they actually started a church. So actually in Rome, because they actually. So they believe, so there are some scholars that believe that Aquila and Priscilla were there in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost when Peter preached, but they were from Rome, but they found themselves in Corinth, but because Claudius, intense persecution happened of believers in Rome, and so he expelled all of the Christians in Rome. Aquila and Priscilla found themselves in Corinth, and that's where Paul met them. And so that's why Paul, when he writes the letter to the Romans, he had never been to Rome. So somebody had already founded a church in Rome, which many people believe it was Aquila and Priscilla that founded the church in Rome. And so he says, I hope to see you and use you as a launching pad to Spain. So, but he had never been to Rome when he wrote the book of Romans. So.
Now,